Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. One of the things that matters to Oakville is the soundness of our finances. And here to talk about them is the Commissioner of Finances and Treasurer of the town of Oakville, Nancy Sully, Jade Surgeoner, who's the Accounting Manager, and John Heiden, who's the Director of Finance and the Deputy Treasurer. Welcome and thank you for making time for this. This is very important to people because they like to know that their money is being looked after well. Nancy, you've been working on town audits for how long? At least 30 years, I think?
30 plus years, yes.
So is there anything different about this year's audit over any of your previous audits? Or are they all clean audits?
As far back as I've been with the town, they've always been clean audits, and this year was no different. I have been with the town for almost 32 years now, and I don't think I don't recall ever seeing an unqualified audit, or a qualified audit. Everything has been good.
So maybe you three can explain what that means, because even saying a clean audit or an unqualified audit is a little bit like jargon to the average person who may not actually ever be audited. So why don't we talk, let's go into the subject by starting with what does that mean anyway?
Maybe I can start with that one. And so just to explain that the purpose of the audit and what it means and what we're hoping to achieve. So that the purpose of any audit is for an independent third party to examine the financial statements of an entity, so for the town, and to provide an audit opinion as to whether or not the financial statements have been presented fairly and in accordance with the applicable standards. So for our situation, the public sector accounting standards. And that the examination is an objective evaluation of the statements, and it just helps enhance the credibility of the information that management's providing in those financial statements.
So now, if you're told you have an unqualified audit, it doesn't mean that it fails to have qualifications. It means that it's not. It basically means it's clean and there's no objection or no fault found. Is I guess what council and I take away from it. So now let's talk a little more about what goes into an audit. It can't be I don't think it's a drive-by experience. Which one of you wants to describe how much work goes into it?
I can handle that question for you. There is a fair bit of work that our auditors do put into conducting their audit. There's a number of different things that they need to consider. They have their own standards that they need to follow, Canadian auditing standards. They have a lot of rules around independence and how they conduct an audit, how they report back to council. And those are all different things that they have to consider. They also need to think about the entity itself. They need to spend a lot of time with our staff, figuring out our processes. And they also need to actually look at a lot of our transactions, what's actually happened this year. We pull a lot of invoices for them. We give them a lot of supporting documentation. There's a lot of things that actually go into it before they're actually able to issue their results or their audit opinion that Jade touched on earlier.
So I had a question from a newer member of council who wanted to know if the same auditor audited our, I'll call them agencies or subsidiaries, like Oakville Hydro and the library and so on. And do you want to talk about whether that is required or not, and if it matters? And in any case, who does all those audits? Is it the same firm?
It is the same firm that does all of them for the town of Oakville and all of our what we call consolidated entities. So we have a number of local boards, including the library, including our BIAs. And so as the town, we have one auditor, and we use that same auditor for the local boards. And I believe that's a requirement of the Municipal Act that any local board entities use the same auditor. We also have a couple of, like you mentioned, other entities that the Hydro Company, Oakville Enterprises, and Oakville MDC actually. And they also use the same auditor that we do here at the town. And there's no requirement for that, but it certainly makes the process run a lot more smoothly because they're able to leverage their own resources within the same firm. And that certainly makes things run cleanly and easily. It doesn't mean that they couldn't, but it certainly helps things on our end. and on theirs, I'm sure.
And if they did choose and they get to choose their auditor in the name of independence, but if they did choose a different auditor, they'd still have to choose an accredited auditor, and an accredited auditor, in theory, would still be following the same professional rules and standards. Is that right?
Absolutely. Audit firms are held to the same standards. They have to conduct a lot of, or they have to conduct all of their audits in accordance with the same sets of rules. They're held accountable to the same standards. There's a lot of scrutiny around that. So if they picked a different audit firm, they would be following the same process that our current auditors follow as well.
Yeah. Now, you guys mentioned the PSAB, Public Sector Accounting Standards. I guess I haven't translated that perfectly, but could you explain whether these standards for the public service entities are, how are they different from private sector, from the ones that the big businesses use?
Jade, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two components. There's the public sector accounting standards, which are the actual standards, and then PSAB is the board that establishes the standards, just for to reconcile those two. So in terms of the differences between public sector accounting standards versus that for public entities. So when I say public, I mean publicly traded entities. There's a lot of differences. A lot relates to how we hold reserve and reserve funds and the fund balances on our accumulated surplus, and really how we need to operate our organization so that we are able to see out fluctuations year to year and be able to maintain kind of all the fund balances. The other key things are dependent on the user. So the standards really are determined by who uses the financial statements, and the users of public sector accounting standards, it could be vary between organizations, but they have different needs in terms of what they're looking at in terms of understanding asset values and some of the other kind of overall pieces of the financial statements. And so that's another difference is the users of why it's different. And trying to think of a few others. Really, I would say the main function is because of the funds and the differences on that.
Well, I know that when I was running YTV, the audits that we would have done, the primary user was the shareholder and the regulator, because there's two audiences for those audits. Who are the primary users of our audits? I mean, obviously it's the residents, the taxpayers, and the council, because council has a duty under the Municipal Act to be sure that controllership and accountancy are done correctly. But who else uses our audit statements?
So another key user would be other levels of government. So we really receive a lot of funding from other levels of government, and sometimes they require separate reports. So I'm just thinking of gas tax or safe restart funding, but they also a lot of times require the audited statements because it does speak a bit to the overall controls within an entity. Now that's one. In terms of other levels of government too, a lot of things are compliance related. So we are required, so it's not related to funding, but for the ministry, we're required to have audited statements under the Municipal Act. And so the ministry takes our reporting, breaks it down into a little more detail so that they can provide that information to other users. So maybe not just residents of Oakville, but other users around the country even, to compare municipalities.
Yeah, now I know that every dollar I've ever seen come our way from a higher level of government comes with a lot of strings attached, and the biggest string of all is, and you got to show what you did with it and prove you used it for what we gave it to you, or we take it all back. And I got to imagine that gives you on our professional staff a huge motivation to make sure that we don't wind up having it clawed back. So the controls that we have to have in place and the tests that the auditors come in to do, they turn into, well, it's not life and death, except in the sense of the life and death of the corporation, I guess I would say. So we also give the government, as I understand it, a financial information statement, I think it's called, the FIS, and that goes to the Ministry of Finance, if I recall correctly. And what I'm getting at here is our finances are open books to the higher levels of government, and for that matter, to the auditors and to, by extension, to the residents. It's my impression as a fellow who worked in corporate business that the public sector, meaning municipal sector, is actually subject to more scrutiny than private business is. Is that your sense of it?
I'll jump in. I would agree with that. It is very highly scrutinized. These are public documents. We do submit to the province. The FIR is also a public document. Residents see them. We are required to publish them each year after the audit is done. And certainly we're the front line, the first line of government. So we are the ones that often residents, groups will look to and look at our statements. So yes, they're very highly scrutinized.
Maybe another thing that people would find useful to know is how governance works, because there's a principle in Oakville of the political side sets policy and actually doesn't get to go into the treasury and tell you what to do. Individuals, nobody's allowed to do that. The council only speaks by resolution. There's actually a law, the Municipal Act that says council can only act by resolution, so and by law. So talk more about the controls that are built into the way we operate the town to protect the integrity of our finances.
Sure. So I can handle that one. Controls are an important part of the organization, an important part of the operation we have here at the town. They cover a multitude of things, including how we spend our money related to the budgets, how we procure things with our procurement bylaw, all the way down to how we handle getting revenues in for a drop-in program at the rec center and how we handle the cash that we receive there. There are a lot of different policies. There's a lot of different procedures and standard operating practices that we need to make sure are robust, that they're being followed. And that's part of our job in finance, is to make sure that those are established and that they're followed, because they make part of this whole picture that we're accountable to the public for. And that's one of the things the auditors look at. They don't look at every transaction, obviously, and they don't look at every control in detail, but they do gain an understanding of our overall controls. And so that's part of the overall transparency and accountability that we have. So you're absolutely right. Those are an important part of the things we have here at the town.
Is there a best practice around how long you keep an auditing firm? On the one hand, it seems like there'd be a big advantage to a long-term contract or a long-term series of contracts, because we do it every year. We're always free to change auditors. But what's the best practice around that? If the familiarity that they gain with your processes and your controls helps them do a better job, but they're in business at any rate. There was always a theory going around that every 7 to 10 years you ought to change your auditor just for the shake-up value. What's the municipal view of shake-up value?
It's a good question. So I'll say a couple of things. You're absolutely right, first of all, in terms of the auditors understanding our organization. It certainly makes for a more efficient audit for them to come in, and that's why we usually have about a 5-year term for them, so they can truly understand our business and we can get an efficient price for the audit work that they do. The flip side to that is you don't want them to be too familiar. Perhaps they might miss something. So one of the things that we've actually been thankful for with our relationship with our current auditors is that they've actually rotated their partners. I think we're on our 3rd audit partner over the past 10 years. And so having a new partner come in, they're the ones that are kind of in charge of the whole audit, and they can provide a different perspective. They can provide a fresh set of eyes that can help us help them, I should say, stay current with what our practices are and ask those good questions. So the current audit partner we've actually had only for 2 years, and he's just joined us. Last year was his first audit. So hopefully that helps a little bit in terms of the turnover or the fresh set of eyes that you were talking about.
Right. Well, I find it very reassuring. I also want to bring out how much work goes into preparing our financial statements before the auditors even show up. And there's two buckets of work that I don't think people appreciate or understand. How much work you do to get the financial statements ready, and how much work you do to prove them to the auditors. Can we get a sense of and how much an audit costs, for that matter?
I think I'll let Jade handle that one. She is the quarterback that we have for our entire financial statement process. So I'll let her take that one away.
So I couldn't tell you the number of hours that we put in, but it really is a lot of time. So we start preparing for it in November. So in November, the audit firm typically would come in and do a little bit of intern work to understand how the year's gone to date, understand kind of what sort of events are unique to 2021. And then throughout, I would say right from January, even December through till March, mid-March, April, we're doing a lot of work, and it really is coordination from everyone across the town. So whether or not it's following controls when you're purchasing something, or just making sure you're receiving documents on time. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure we've accounted for everything correctly, and getting things up to a spot where then we in finance can review it and to make sure that we have comfort on it before it goes to the auditors as well. So overall, it's almost a 4 or 5 month process, because you then take a lot of time proving out, preparing your reconciliations, and then showing the auditors how they all tie in to the bigger picture of the financial statements, and coordinating note support. I would say it's a 5 month process for sure. So it's a lot of effort, and it really isn't just finance. It's from all over the organization. Asset management has a lot of input into the financial statements, and then all the departments that are purchasing, or even things like payroll, submitting payroll on time, so our records, everything's up to date. There's a lot of aspects of it.
So this is no drive-by activity.
No.
This is extensive and deep. And the auditors, can they go anywhere in the organization and check anything they want at any time?
In terms of anywhere, do you mean like any sort of documentation?
Yeah. So, if they have questions about no matter what, they can go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the importance of it being independent, and that management is opening up our records so that they have that unique opportunity to check everything they want. So although they don't check everything, they could. And if there was something that they wanted to look into further, they absolutely have that right. And if we weren't to show them to the auditors, it'd be something that would likely be in front of council in terms of highlighting that they weren't able to see something.
I know when council received the audit, a couple of councillors were interested to know if our audit is compared to other municipal audits, and how we compare. And I think the answer was along the lines of, are you kidding? Everybody's required to use top level professional auditors. How could you expect audits to differ too much in quality? But I think what they were getting at is do all municipalities always have clean audits, or are we better in that way? And what's your recollection on that?
So maybe I'll start with
Go
that.
ahead, Jay.
I would say most audits would all be clean, but there's the opportunity to say what adjustments were made to get them to that point. So if an auditor came in and audited a set of financial statements and they weren't clean right away, they would be presenting to council all the different adjustments that they needed to make in order for the statements to present fairly. And so ultimately, I think most get there. It's just a matter of how many adjustments the auditor makes versus what management had ready for them. And that was one thing that is always presented to council, is the number of unadjusted differences and the number of adjusted differences.
And just so we don't confuse anybody, how were we on that?
So for the 2021 year, we had no unadjusted differences and there was no adjusted differences within our audit.
And those are that's the technical part of the kind of, I guess, ad hoc expression, clean audit. That's really what we're getting at when we talk about that. So now the province collects all of the financial information of all of the municipalities. What do we ever hear back from them? I mean, in theory, we're not going to hear anything bad back from them because we're the goody two shoes, but do they ever talk about municipalities as a group? Has there been any practical learning coming back from all those FIS statements that we all send in? I mean, do they really read them? I guess I'm asking.
Well, well, sometimes we ask that. I think they do. They do look at them. They do flag if there are financial risks in a municipality. We do get a report back each year from the province indicating how they've assessed our risk level. And I will tell you that we have a very low risk at the town of Oakville. But I would think if a municipality comes in is flagged as a high risk, they're going to get a lot more involved. So in our case, they don't get involved because we are in a very good position, but they do look at it and they do use that FIR data for comparative purposes and analysis.
Yeah. Well, you know, the province, I'm not sure everybody knows this, but the province has the power to send in an administrator and run things and, you know, put council on ice and tell staff what to do. And I'm pretty sure they've never done that to Oakville. So not in our time, right?
Not in our time, for sure.
So now let's talk about just how healthy we are. I like to boast that the Institute of Municipal Finance and Governance at the University of Toronto pegs us as the municipality with the healthiest finances, and they wrote a book about it, and they said in their book that our fiscal health is 30% better than number 2. And I thought, you know, that's number 1 and then some. So I was pretty happy about that. And as you may have heard me from time to time, I do like to brag about that. Just how healthy are our finances?
Our finances are quite healthy. We have one of the measures, I guess, would be our stabilization reserves. We have Government Finance Officers Association recommends a minimum of 17% of your gross expenditures in reserves. Stabilization reserves are used, you know, for unforeseen events. So during the pandemic, when suddenly your revenue drops off because you have to close your rec centers and things, you need reserves to be able to pull that in to continue paying the bills, basically. For the town of Oakville, we're sitting at about 26%. So we've got quite healthy stabilization reserves. That sets us in a good place if there's unforeseen events. Our capital reserves are very healthy as well. And our debt levels are quite low. The province has a 25% for debt charges. And our council approved policy is 12%. We're sitting at 4%. And I think that's important because if you've got very high debt and debt charge payments, that's taking away what you've got to fund your operations and even to grow the municipality and provide for new services. So keeping our debt low and using it where it's prudent, I think has served us very well, and it puts us in a very good position.
Yeah, I know of cities that aren't that far away from us who do not rise to the 17% of expense level for their stabilization funds. And I know of cities who do meet 17%, but don't reach 26%. In fact, I'm not sure anybody is as well set off as we are in that regard. Do you have anything to add to that picture of our health?
John, do you have anything?
No, I think it's worth stating again that we do have a very strong reserve balance. that affords us the opportunity to do good asset management planning. It sets us up well for that. As I'm sure you're aware, there's new regulations related to that, and our teams are busy working on asset management planning. So that certainly helps us in that regard. And I think if you look at our balance sheet, as an organization, we're in a very strong position. That certainly helps us. So I think that's a message that's worth letting people know as well.
Well, it's certainly allowed us to launch a number of capital projects that we might not have been able to otherwise, and the residents are benefiting from those, including the new North Park Community Center. When that's completed, we will finally have a community center in each of our 7 wards, and we had 3 and 6 when I became mayor, so I'm a little bit proud of that. Now, there is a threat of recession on the horizon, and we have been through one before in 2008 and 9, and we had healthy reserves then. In fact, I'm proud of the fact that we've always had good reserves, and we were able to navigate that recession pretty well. And Commissioner Sully, how are we, if the present talk and forecasts of recession come true, how are we set this time?
So we're starting from a very good position. 2008 and 9, when the recession hit, it hit very quickly, especially within our building, planning, development, engineering departments. Our building services, we have a building enterprise reserve, so that will help smooth that impact, because of course the workload on building permits underway doesn't end, but new revenue coming in might slow down. So we have healthy reserves there. We have a lot of processes in place to look at our staffing levels. So I think we're starting from a very good position, and certainly the potential of a recession going forward will certainly be taken into account as we start to undertake our 2023 budget.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody wants a recession, but and if there is one, the consolation is we're trained and experienced, and we've successfully handled a real big one. And if necessary, we can do it again. Thank you very much for explaining all these things to the residents. And thank you for watching. And we'll see you next time on Oakville Matters.